Okay, I'm going to talk very quickly so that we can dive right into the presentation, but my name is Dr. Melissa Weinsz. I've been working with Dr. Bodack within the CCACSA Academic Center for Student Athletes for the past 3 years within the Department of Tiger Life. We address life skills, not challenges or issues, but life skills opportunities for our student athletes here at LSU, and I've had the opportunity to collaborate with Dr. Bodack on our Global Tigers committee over the past year, hence where this presentation has come from. So Dr. B, take it away.
Can you advance the slide? Okay. Okay, everybody. What are we going to be talking to you about today? We're going to try to shed some light on how this committee was formed, provide some demographics regarding our international student athlete population, talk about how we collaborated across different entities, both internal and external to LSU, as well as some of our current projects.
Before we dive into that, though, we're going to do a little pop quiz and see what everyone knows on this Zoom call. Please feel free to drop your answers in the chat, or if you're feeling super excited and compelled to answer, we'd love to hear your voice and see your face. So do not be scared to unmute yourself. So first question in this quiz is about enrollment. So a little bit over 1 million international students, which is an increase from the previous year, were enrolled in U.S. institutions during the 2022 through 2023 academic school year. True or false? Would anyone like to answer on the mic? If so, please feel free to unmute yourself. No? Do we have any answers in the chat? I do not. Let's see. We have true, a couple answers of true. Okay, excellent. So that is in fact correct, y'all. The enrollment number grew by 12% over the academic school year from 2021 to 2022, and that was due to a variety of different post-pandemic factors.
Okay, so you did great on question 1. Let's see how we do on question 2. Again, these are all going to be true and false. China and Canada saw the largest uptick of students traveling internationally to study in the United States. True or false? You can put your answer in the chat.
Okay, we have one true from Jordy. Okay, another true, some more trues. Let's see.
Okay, the answer is false. It's actually India and Africa saw the largest uptick in international studies during the 2022-2023 academic school year.
All right, y'all, next question, we're going to address some taxes. So a student athlete who receives scholarship for tuition, fees, and books will receive a 1042-S form. True or false? Oh, we got some excitement. We got a true with an exclamation point. What else we got? Some more trues. Trues. Okay. The answer, y'all, is actually false. This one was very tricky. They will receive a 1042-S scholarship form, but that's only if they're taxed on room and board in cash, as opposed to tuition, fees, and books. We had an example of that happen for us this past tax season with international student athletes, so we thought we'd throw it in there.
Okay, moving on to our next question. Now we're going to sort of switch gears a little bit, look at identifying countries. True or false? This flag represents the country of Zimbabwe. All right, so let's see. And the answer is true. So great job to everyone for saying true on that one. And then
last but not least, we have one more question. A J1 visa is needed for international student athletes to study in the United States. True or false? A J1 visa. False, false, false. We got a couple falses. Y'all are good at this. That is correct. The answer is false. It is not a J1 visa, but it is an F1 visa that's needed for international student athletes to study in the United States.
Okay, so I bet you didn't think you'd be taking a quiz on a Friday morning, but good job to those of you that participated, and hopefully we didn't cause too much stress. So now a little bit about our committee formation. Under the name of, you'll see Global Tigers. So that is the name of our committee. Initially, it was formed to focus on international student athletes. It has then transitioned to also focus on graduate transfer students, as well as first generation students. So we try to encompass all of that in our name. And to those of you not familiar with sort of South Louisiana, kind of the Cajun spelling of go would be G-E-A-U-X. So we try to encompass that Cajun spelling into as many words as we possibly can. Okay, so some questions that were initially posed when we were looking at forming the committee, and some of them were questions that I had posed, is what was our total number of international student athletes? What teams had representation from the international student athletes? What countries were represented? And what country is home to our largest international student athlete population? Okay, so now looking at some numbers, the fun part, Louise, as the chemist to me, kind of likes data. So really started looking at the numbers going back to the fall 2021 semester. And we've gotten the numbers for fall 21, 22, as well as 2023. And what you can see from this slide is we have a variety of countries represented. In 21, we had a total of 49 ISAs for our international student athletes. It jumped to 60 in 22, fall of 22, and in fall of 23, we're at 57. Each year, though, the number of countries represented has increased. We went from 19 to 25 to 26. In both fall of 21 and 22, the country with the most representation was the United Kingdom. This year, it is Canada. The second highest countries in represented for 21 and 22 were Sweden. Oh, actually, all 3 years. I'm sorry, I'm doing my numbers wrong here. Purple. Oh, yeah, I'm doing it right. Sweden for all 3 years. Also in 21, we had Mexico was our second largest representation. And then we varied in what our third country has been with the largest population of international student athletes. Spain in 21, Canada in 22. And this year we have a tie with Israel, Jamaica, and Nigeria for the third most populated countries. To those of you who like graphs, we have the graph on the right-hand side that's kind of showing those numbers. If you know anything about Mardi Gras, colors are purple, yellow, and green. So trying to tie in a little bit of that as well. Okay, in case you're wondering what sports are populated with international student athletes, we have women's basketball, women's golf, women's track, soccer, women's beach volleyball, women's swimming, women's tennis, and women's volleyball. And then football, men's golf, men's track, men's swimming, and men's tennis. This year, for the first time, we had 3 new countries enter into, or 3 new sports have representation by international student athletes. That was beach volleyball has 2, volleyball has 1, and football has 1 as well. Okay, so what can we say about the any data surprises? Well, we were excited to see this year that we had 13 of our 17 teams have an international student athlete representation. Just looking at the sheer numbers, not percentages, men and women swimming have the most international student athletes. And just so you know here, international student athletes, some of them share the identity of first generation. I'm sure that's across many institutions as well. The way LSU defines a first generation international student is that a student has a parent or guardian that has not received a 4-year degree from a U.S. higher ed institution. One of the things that we're going to start doing, especially looking at the numbers of students now coming in the spring semester, whether it be from transfers or first-time freshmen, we're going to also start tracking the numbers across the spring semester as well to see how those have changed. Kind of one other surprise that we saw, not necessarily so much a surprise, but our first 2 years we had a very high numbers from United Kingdom. That was 12. This year, I think it dropped to about 3. Some of the changes that we are seeing are just due to graduation and transfers, but also we had a number of students opt out of college this year to train for the Olympic trials and prepare for those, being we are in an Olympic year. So that could explain some of the changes that we've seen.
So on top of this large amount of both student athletes and also teams requiring assistance for any types of barriers and challenges with communicating with academic advisors and learning specialists, we've been able to identify a multitude of different barriers and challenges that our international student athletes are experiencing. So we've had conversations around nutrition, so different dietary restrictions, not understanding food options or just knowing how to prepare food appropriately. We've had questions about filling out certain paperwork for traveling to and from their home country. Some of them have had questions about acquiring driver's license, obtaining car insurance, understanding different academic policies and procedures have also been prevalent in conversations too. They've also had issues to where they've never visited campus or the United States prior to coming to LSU, so navigating campus has also been a challenge. Different financial aid questions and FAFSA forms, questions regarding academic integrity and plagiarism, not intentional, but just potentially due to barriers with cultural understanding and language barriers too. Communicating with athletics and their academic staff and understanding how to advocate for themselves appropriately. Then also taxes, which we spent a large amount of our time building and developing programming for. So we realized that we had all these different barriers and challenges, so we thought, okay, who are the subject matter experts in all of these topics? Because Dr. B and myself certainly are not subject matter experts in a lot of these different areas, but we realized that there are a lot of incredible entities on campus to where we can bring them in to work with our student athletes and collaborate with them as much as we possibly can. So some examples of internal and external resources that we've utilized thus far are listed here. I won't read all of them because we'll go into them a little bit more in detail, but this is not exhaustive, and this is really truly just scraping the surface of different entities on campus that we've been collaborating with over the past 2 years. So the International Cultural Center has been a huge advocate for all of our programming thus far with Global Tigers, and we see this relationship evolving in a multitude of different ways over the next couple years. We've utilized them a lot currently. For what resources do you currently provide for all international students, and how can we make sure that our student athletes are receiving the same resources, and we're reiterating the different messages that the ICC is sharing with the entire LSU athletics community. But they offer a lot of different social connectivity opportunities, and that's something that we really want to tap into next year as a committee as well. The Olin Career Center helps us a lot with professional development resources. They have links to different websites, platforms, whatever it may be, to help address needs for international students wanting to either receive different types of visas, find companies that are willing to provide these visas, and then just figuring out what steps come next. They really truly have been a huge help in a lot of different, not only Global Tiger programming, but also Tiger Life activities over the past 2 years. We've worked a lot with accounting services and payroll in regard to what the heck's an ITIN number, how do we find that, how do we make sure our student athletes have it, and just ensuring that they have everything that they need in order to file their taxes. We've done some pretty fun initiatives and collaborations with our LSU Athletics Dining Services, and Dr. Bodack's going to address that in a couple slides. Also, VITA for tax assistance, that's an external entity on campus, not necessarily part of LSU and or the athletic department, but they have been a vital resource for us over the past 2 years to ensure our international student athletes are supported. And then also Dr. B is much better at this than I am, but I'm starting to jump on the train too, but attending webinars and just furthering our education and collaborating with different entities across NCAA and the SEC.
Okay, so now the fun part. What are some of the current projects that we're working on? And I know Dr. Weinsz alluded to them, so without further ado, So kind of on the left-hand side are some of the projects that we're going to talk about. We're going to go into the detail in each of those in just a moment. But just sort of some things to think about is how do you come up with these ideas? It's very important to be listening to our student athletes, asking them questions, working with our advisors, with athletics administration. Dr. Weinsz and I, it's kind of ironic that I'm actually chairing this committee and Dr. Weinsz is on the subcommittee with international student athletes, where neither of us are international student athletes. I'm not first generation and I'm not a graduate transfer, so I've learned a lot. I'm still learning a lot. And the important thing is who can help us on campus navigate these avenues as we want to engage in these initiatives. Again, listening to student athletes and coaches, what do they have to say? Questions, concerns, experiences. Again, emphasizing the administrative support. We have student leadership groups, our student athletes advisory committee, and our Black Student Athlete Association. And then just finding support groups who support ISAs, whether it's across the conferences or institutions. Again, and what we want to do, the goal of all this is to celebrate culture, heritage, and community, and to build it within our building and on campus.
So as Dr. Bodack said, we've got a couple of different current initiatives that we're working on within our Global Tigers committee, but particularly the ISA subcommittee. And one of our first projects was digital signage. So we have a multitude of different TVs and different technology systems throughout our building, and we thought that that could be a great way to start to internally celebrate the different student athletes that utilize this building here in Cox. And we've also spread some of these messages out to our social media platforms as well. But major successes with this digital signage project is that it was a really unique way to celebrate International Education Week. We did that from November 14th to 18th, and that's when this project was currently going through the virtual signage in our building. So this was an incredible way to display information about the different countries that were represented from our current ISA student athletes. The process looked like obtaining a list of ISAs and their emails, and then we emailed and or spoke in person to all these ISAs about the purpose of this project, and we asked them to specifically create a PowerPoint about their home country and different things that they wanted to celebrate and share and that were important to them. Unfortunately, not all international student athletes were represented in the first year of this project, and only a certain amount of teams did participate, but we did have some great participation nonetheless. And also, there are a couple different barriers that we experienced when trying to implement this project as well. And that came from emailing and technology being something that can be difficult for ISAs to navigate if they're not very familiar with it. And that can also be difficult to communicate clearly with them in a multitude of different ways. And then we also came up with this idea probably about 2 weeks or so before the actual education week in November. So we had a very quick turnaround, but we're able to plan appropriately and accordingly in the future. Next project.
Okay, so our flag project, and looking at this, this is was conceived by a former international student athlete. She was working on her master's degree, completing an internship in the Office of Multicultural Affairs and Diversity. And she actually came up with this idea, proposed it to our executive director, Kenneth Miles, at the time. He said, put a proposal together. She put a proposal together. And in the 2016-2017 year, the flag project came about. And what we want to do is recognize the home countries of our international student athletes. And we are also doing this to acknowledge and celebrate the diversity within our student athlete population and promote cultural awareness and acceptance. It was important at the time for student athletes to know, and even our current student athletes, that flags will not be removed once they leave the institution. What we're always going to do is add to the collection of flags that we have. So they were really excited about that. But I think probably one of the highlights is seeing the excitement on the students' faces when they see the flag being installed or when they actually come in and see it. It's also been an opportunity, particularly during recruiting, when coaches and families are here and they start looking at all the flags, trying to identify them. And how we do this is we work with the advisors to identify the home countries of the ISAs. So the flags are ordered once a year, and then we have to approve locations for hanging them. And so typically we usually put the order in around June or July. So what that means is, this is kind of one of our challenges, is that the flags, particularly if they're a late admit, then they might get here and their flag's not on the wall. So I've seen some students very disappointed when they didn't see their flag on the wall, but then we're telling them like, hey, it's on order, it'll be here, be patient. And then reaching back out to those students once the flag is here and installed, like, hey, did you see your flags up? So there might be some initial disappointment, but we try to follow it up with some excitement once the flag gets here. Okay, our next project is the Taste of Home. So this first occurred in 2021. And if you ever heard somebody talk about, like, it never hurts to ask a question, that's actually how this project came about. We were looking at what we can do for International Education Week. And I went to one of our athletic administrators because I really didn't know who to reach out to. And I'm like, hey, we have this International Education Week. We want to celebrate our student athletes. Would it be possible that somehow we can have maybe some meals corresponding to some of their countries? They asked me what my vision of this was. And I said, well, ideally, I think it would be great if it could be something every day of the week. But I also understand if that can't be done, maybe we just have one day where we're celebrating through breakfast, lunch, and dinner, foods of various countries. Having the data was very good because the next question they asked is like, well, what countries are represented? So I just sent over the list of countries I had, how many students were from each country. They looked through the list and they put this wonderful menu together. So we did advertise it so the students knew it was coming up. They were super, super excited about it. Our staff was excited. We did try to go over at least once a day to partake of one of the meals. We learned a lot about some of the cuisine that the students eat. We asked them about it. I'd say the only downside of when it occurred is some of our teams were away that week traveling, so they got to miss it. So we're going to have to see what we can do about that in the future. But even though they weren't here, they were super excited that others got to partake of food from their countries. And I know I'm probably making some of you hungry now as you peruse that menu.
It is almost lunchtime, so that's a good point, Dr. B. As I mentioned before, tax assistance was a huge initiative of our Global Tigers Committee over the past particularly 2 years. And we have two really exciting stats that we wanted to share with the group that we're really proud of, but also want to celebrate for both VITA and then the Global Tigers Initiative. But 75% of our current international student athletes utilized this service in 2024. As you all know, anyone that engages in any student athlete development programming, that is a huge percentage of a total population of student athletes that are engaging in something. Yes, taxes are mandatory, but they saw this as a resource that they felt comfortable going to and asking these questions. So that was huge in comparison to the 62% that utilized it in 2023, which is still a huge number. And then we just received this information that over $55,000 in federal tax returns is going to go to our student athletes this year, which is huge. And then the year before, our first year when we worked with VITA, about $30,000+ in federal tax returns was going to our student athletes too. So that is a substantial amount of money. And Dr. Bodack had a dream to make this program happen about 12+ years ago, right, Dr. B? And
yeah, since I got here 10 plus years ago.
Yeah, 10+ years ago. So it's been really incredible to see this project come to fruition. There were some major successes over this past year. We have yet to meet to debrief for this specific year because it literally ended last Monday. But for next year's presentation, we'll have some new and exciting fun things to share. But over 6 athletes, at least this past tax season, not this one, the one before, filed at least 2 or plus more years of taxes. We had a couple this year that filed 4. So we are super excited that they're recognizing this as a resource and taking the initiative to make sure that everything is done and filed on there, and both federally and then also as state taxes. And then we were able to assist every single team with a documented international student athlete, which was very exciting as well. What this process looks like, there's a bunch of different intricacies to it, and if you're interested in learning more about what it really looked like from A to Z, please feel free to reach out to Dr. Bodack and myself. But for a very brief, like 50,000 foot view, we have a couple different bullet points for exactly what we did. So we coordinated first with VITA to make sure, hey, when are you available? When are you free? When can we get you to Cox to meet with our student athletes in a one-on-one format for 45-minute sessions? Because it was essential to us that we got this resource in the space of our student athletes, where the student athletes already know where to go, they know where this place is located, they will not miss the meeting, they already know that they're familiar with people here. So we found VITA's availability. And then from there, our senior women's administrator, she shared the list of current international student athletes that we have at our institution. And that list also broke down further into transfer student athletes, so who's coming from additional or different institutions, and who just received or just came to LSU and received scholarships starting in the spring. So it was very important for us to indicate those two things, because if they just arrived to LSU as first-year students in the spring, they'll not have tax information to file. But if they're transferring from a different institution, they'll need that 1042S from their previous institution to file while they're at LSU. So we were able to be proactive in regard to communicating with those student athletes and reaching out to their advisors and directors of ops to schedule these sessions. So that goes really nicely into the next bullet point. As soon as we knew that student athletes received their 1042Ss, those were released, we had the list of international student athletes, and we knew VITA was available. We communicated with advisors and directors of operations of all the student athletes. So Dr. Bodack and myself did not reach out to these international student athletes individually. We reached out to the entities at large that were responsible for both their academic and athletic schedules. So we put it upon the advisors and directors of ops to ensure that student athletes were aware of what scheduling obligations they already had, so that they could schedule these sessions with VITA. So as soon as those were scheduled, we reached out to the international student athletes directly and said, hey, this is your session time. These are the different forms that you need to be bringing, and this is who you're going to be meeting with and when and where. And then we sent that out on Friday, and their appointments were on Mondays. And we had 4+ hour long sessions with all the different sessions that we were scheduled. So it wasn't seamless by any means, and we learned different ways to improve this process as well. Something that I do want to mention too, which has been a little bit of a challenge here at LSU, is that we have these sessions with VITA to where they're filing their taxes, but the next step is, for a lot of them, they don't have their ITIN numbers, or they don't have social security numbers. So then we have to collaborate with accounting services to make sure that these student athletes now reach out to the next entity, make sure that they schedule a meeting with accounting services to receive their ITIN numbers to finally file their taxes. So there are two major steps in this process, but we're trying to figure out a more fluid and efficient way to complete this in the future. So, like I said, issues obtaining ITIN numbers, or if they don't have social security numbers, if any institution out there has those numbers readily available for students when they come to campus, please let us know, and we'd love to also facilitate that same format at LSU. We also had issues accessing some 1042S scholarship forms from previous institutions as transfer student athletes. That slowed down the process a little bit, but normally as soon as they met with VITA, they were able to communicate with their previous institutions afterwards and reschedule that session with VITA to finish filing their taxes. The first year had 30-minute appointment times, but then we realized that when student athletes come in and have 4 years of taxes to file, 30 minutes is not enough time. So we ended up expanding the session times to 45 minutes this past year, and that did help, but there is truly no way to account for how much time will be needed for these sessions. But 45 minutes to an hour is definitely recommended. And then, like I said before, some student athletes are filing for multiple years of taxes. Dr. Bodack, is there anything else you'd like to add for this slide?
Well, I'd say one of the things too that we've had some student athletes do when they're in the sessions is they want a parent on the phone. So they'll call their parent and parents on speakerphone the whole time just to basically hear what's going on. And then our VITA reps have been very good. Our night has been Monday night to handle taxes. That's, in an ideal world, that would work 100% for all of our student athletes, but it doesn't. So our VITA reps have been very flexible. If we reach out to them like, hey, this student is available on these dates and time, do any of them work for you? They've been able to accommodate those student athletes. So I think just about everybody that needed to have an appointment or wanted an appointment was able to get an appointment even if it wasn't on those Monday nights.
Something Dr. Bodack and I have also talked about is having teams schedule specific nights when they're just going to bring all of the team, all the student athletes in on that specific night too. So if it's not randomized by their schedule availability, it's an entire team coming in to meet with VITA. Okay, excellent. So another major initiative that our International Student Athlete Subcommittee has been working on over the past 2 years now is creating a resource guide. We have an incredible graduate assistant, Fernanda, who's on our subcommittee that started this initiative by herself before the committee even started working on it. So on top of what Fernanda had, and then also seeing what other schools are producing and putting out there for resource guides, this has been a major push of our subcommittee. So this is the first initiative of its kind that would be coming from LSU, particularly from our Cox Academic Center. It's never been completed before. And this has allowed us the opportunity to build relationships or collaborate amongst new campus partners that do have these different resources or information that we would want to put in this resource guide. And we're hopeful that this resource guide is able to address any immediate needs of our current international student athletes. So initially we thought we're going to have this printed book, this resource guide that we're able to mail out and or send to any international student athletes that will be coming to campus. But we also talked about having it as a virtual PDF and resource too. So this process has been a little disjointed from start to finish, but we're still working on finishing this resource guide, and we're pretty dang close. But we were researching what institutions have already created in regard to resource manuals. And I think there are 3 or 4 different institutions that had great information that were out there. So we were able to follow the format of a lot of these different resources and not reinvent the wheel and collaborate and put it all into one. We divided the different sections amongst our subcommittee members so that one person wasn't doing the entire project themselves. And then we were very intentional about setting deadlines to ensure that we were completing writing the chapters, looking at formatting, and seeing what different resources needed to be added. And we wanted to make sure that all campus partners were able to provide edits for this resource guide. So that's currently where we are in a holding pattern with printing and providing this resource for our international student athletes. Branding and creative details can potentially stall this process a little bit further as well to make sure that everything is done correctly and cleanly the first time around. Then also ensuring that all different parties or entities on campus are able to provide edits and make sure that all details are complete as well.
Okay, I see we had a question
yes.
there about the manual in terms of are we open to sharing what your good guide looks like at LSU? Absolutely, once it's the finished product. We are still, the text is version is just about done, text only version. Is that correct, Dr. Weinsz?
That's correct, yes.
And then we'll be sending that out for review from various departments that are impacted by it to make sure all the information is correct. And then from there, we will, it'll go to creative services to add pictures. Ideally, in an ideal world, we would like to have this ready to go for fall semester because we're relying on other people's timelines with projects. I don't know if it'll be ready to go fall semester, but if we could have it by the end of the year, would be awesome. And once it comes out, we will let people know. So great question. Thank you for asking that. Okay. Now for sort of another initiative that we have. It's kind of the holiday calendar. So this is an opportunity for staff to learn more about international holidays as well as our students, and gives us an opportunity to engage with the ISAs regarding the holiday. Pretty much I use Outlook to highlight the countries of holidays I'm interested in, and then it pops up in my calendar. And then kind of some of the challenges have been finding a consistent way to share knowledge with staff and the ISAs. We put some information on our digital signage. It's great to know about the holidays, but then the question is like, well, how do you address that holiday with the student athlete? Is it appropriate to say like, hey, so like Monday, what day was this? Monday, February 19th was Family Day, celebrated by many provinces in Canada. So I worked with a student athlete from Canada and I said, hey, I know it's Family Day in Canada. Like, how do you is it appropriate to say like Happy Family Day? She was like so excited that I knew this. She almost started crying, and then she's like, well, how did you know that? So it's also a way, I think, to engage with the student athletes and find out from them sort of what is the custom in their country, and then educate our staff on that. A couple of ways we have sort of when we've put it out about some of the holidays, we do have an email that goes out to our staff every day, putting that information in the email, as well as digital signage. So again, trying to celebrate them. Now that our number of countries are increasing, there are some days I have multiple holidays on my calendar. So getting to learn a lot about those.
So Dr. Bodack and I can sit here until we're blue in the face telling you about all these great things that we're doing. But we thought it could be really powerful to share with you what some of our student athletes have shared about their experience just being at LSU within the athletic department as an international student athlete, and then also taking advantage of some of the resources that our Global Tigers Committee is providing for them. So Angelina, one of our incredible soccer student athletes from Sweden, she shared this great quote with Dr. Bodack and myself. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I have bolded a couple things in her quote that I feel like are substantial to mention. And that's that as an international student athlete, LSU Athletics, our Cox Academic Center, has made her feel comfortable with being uncomfortable. We have made an immense and intentional effort as a community in this building to make sure that student athletes feel like they're in a brave space to where they can try and do uncomfortable things, but still feel supported in that process. Also, she specifically mentioned making sure that her visa is up to date and making sure that she's able to file her taxes correctly too. She's filed taxes with us the past 2 years, and that's been a huge resource for her. And then also, she said it was a smaller thing, but really, truly, this is pretty big. But being understanding and supportive in times of need, even across cultural understandings, which has shown to be a huge, immense amount of growth for her personally and professionally. And then we have Chen, who's a part of our men's tennis team, and he is from Australia. And he, a man of few words, but a man of intentional words nonetheless. He shared with us that he was able to gain access to a bunch of different resources that he didn't really realize that he needed. Once again, he mentioned taxes as well too. And he shared that everything was organized and it was easy to follow, and that he can tell that our Global Tigers Committee was intentional with putting together these efforts for them. And then last but not least, we have Paris from Canada. He's a part of our football team. And he mentioned the professional development opportunities that we provide for international student athletes. We have several different networking events throughout the year, and one in particular, we make sure that we provide a resource for all student athletes in attendance, and we indicate which companies are willing to provide internships and job opportunities for international student athletes. And then he also mentioned our Black Student Athlete Association and how that's a place for a multitude of different identities for him to engage with each other in a safe space with other student athletes. So,
Okay, go on.
go ahead, Dr. B.
I was just going to say one thing I neglected to point out when we did talk about our taxes, and Dr. Weinsz did mention that some of our sessions ran long beyond the time slots that the students signed up for, is even if students had to wait, they were all super understanding. We were very communicative with them, letting them know what was going on. A lot of them would just sit there, work on homework, or they're like, hey, can I go to a study room? I'll be in the study room. And when it's time for me to go, can you just come grab me? So we were very fortunate that both years we've done this, that they've been very understanding and recognizing that we have this opportunity for them.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dr. Bodack. So if you all heard of some of these initiatives today, you're super excited about them, Dr. Bodack and I have provided a couple questions that you all can ask yourselves before you start engaging in any of these opportunities. So really start thinking about the certain statistics at your institution. What sports have international student athletes? Which countries, which part of your international student population is highly populated from various countries? Do you currently have any support programming in place? And if you do not, where and how can you start? And a great place to look is different campus resources that are already available. So take inventory of what resources, what departments, what different initiatives are already in place at your current institution. And how could something else to consider is how could a variation in a multitude of cultural norms influence transitional success of student athletes coming to your institution?
Okay, and some other questions to consider could be how the intersection of identities influences their collegiate experience and satisfaction. So again, are they an ISA and first gen? What does your athletic department do to welcome international student athletes when they arrive to campus? What support is provided for international students during global events and/or conflict? And what support do you personally provide in your current role? So those are just some, beginning questions to consider. Maybe if it's not something that you've really thought about before.
We had a question in the chat, Dr. B, about where do your coaches come into play with this type of support and making sure athletics or athletes get acclimated to the United States. So an immediate response that I have to that, Dr. B, then I'm going to turn it over to you for your thoughts, is that the coaching staff, in particular the director of operations, have been great in advocating for what these student athletes need. I think these are conversations that are absolutely happening amongst coaching staff, and director of operations are normally who we immediately communicate with on a daily basis. But Dr. B, what have you experienced?
I would agree with what Dr. Weinsz says. I also think what's been very important in some cases is their teammates. So in some cases, it might be a coach maybe appointing sort of a buddy system on the team. In other cases, it's students recognizing, hey, this person needs help. We're just going to take them under my wing, and maybe for the first couple of weeks, like be glued to their side, showing them around campus where they need to be. In the academic center, they rely a lot on us too. In the academic center, we have a support in place for the student athletes, whether it's working with their advisor, a learning specialist, or a tutor, or working with all three of them. For the most part, sort of the coaches have been good with communicating with advisors, maybe the level of support that the students would need. In some cases, every now and then we get a little bit of a surprise.
Perfect. All right. A couple of y'all reached out in the chat and said that you are highly interested in this resource manual. Please take Dr. Bodack or myself's email down, email us your name. We'll make sure to keep track of that and reach back out to you when we get that information. But thank you everyone for attending. Dr. B, what do you got for acknowledgements?
Just, the Student Support Summit, Cox Communications, Academic Center for Student Athletes, Walt Holliday, who's the executive director. I'm going to put a little plug in for him. It's his birthday today, so he's really excited by that. Dr. Weinsz and I could not have done this without the Global Tigers Committee, particularly the International Student Athlete Subcommittee, and all of our campus partners.
As Dr. Bodack mentioned, the International Student Athletes Subcommittee is a group of exceptional individuals, and they made all these initiatives possible. So we've got Kirsten Peterman, who leads the subcommittee, and she's actually fun to note. She's from Canada herself, so an international employee of LSU Athletics. And as I mentioned before, Fernanda, she's a graduate assistant within the subcommittee and also an international individual from Brazil. And she started asking a lot of these questions and working on these initiatives before this committee was even formed. And she's also going to be looking for a job within the next year if anyone's hiring. We have Priscilla, who's a learning specialist, and has been an essential piece in making sure a lot of these different projects come to life. And we also just had Blair join us from the compliance and athletic side of things, which helps us a lot with different policies and regulations that we need to be aware of.
And then I would just give a special shout out to Kirsten chairing the subcommittee, just for keeping the subcommittee on task with deadlines and communicating to me and the executive director about any challenges that they've had. So this has been a amazing subcommittee to work with. I feel honored to be leading them.
Something that Dr. Bodack was very intentional about is making sure that we had an entity from every part of the student support services. So we've got an academic advisor, learning specialist, graduate assistant perspective, then also we've looped in compliance as well. So making sure that we're getting support, we're getting challenges, barriers, whatever it may be, from the holistic experience of a student athlete being here at LSU. All right, any additional questions?
Maybe while they're thinking of questions, you want to put that last slide up there. And this is the QR code for the evaluation of our session. So please take a minute or two to fill that out. Again, the only way we become better is hearing from you.